Welcome everyone to Awesome Truth, a wrestling book club. I'm your host, Steve Semino, and with me as always is my co-host, Walt Schwenk. Hey, Walters.
Hello, Steven. How's it going?
My friend, it is going very well. Welcome back, everyone. Welcome to Awesome Truth. We are talking about a documentary series today, Walt. We are talking about an A&E documentary series. There is a explosion of content happening right now on the Arts and Entertainment Network that is WWE centric, and that includes biography, doing WWE Superstars editions like we did in our Booker T episode, which is in our archives, and it also includes another series called WWE Rivals, which, well, I think when we first heard of this and decided, all right, let's do some more A&E, I was not particularly pumped to watch Rivals because it sounded like another version of the same thing we've heard a million times before. But I will say, in this one episode we watched, the Hulk Hogan Andre the Giant episode, I was pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, for starters, I needed to figure out first when we were talking rivals, like which rivals are we talking about?
Is
Because there
there
was
literally another rival show called Rivals on the network?
yeah, I think so. I mean, because they have like completely different episodes, and I would assume a completely different execution, but I didn't actually I haven't seen one in a long time. I think I watched the
I
Michaels.
think it's called Rivalries, maybe.
Okay, wow,
so
wow,
it's not about the
stupid
rivals;
me.
it's about the rivalries.
Yeah, sure. Well, I guess they just they made a quick pivot to rivals, but ultimately, I needed to realize or figure out like which one was this and where was it and how old it is because the original rivalries is like many years old. I feel like they came out with that a long time ago when they were first making content for the network. So I'm like, I just had to do a quick equilibrium check. I'm like, where am I? What year is it? Where am I going? Like, what network is this crap on? But um, pleasantly surprised, I think, is the best way to the best Rotten Tomato score to give it.
Yeah, I mean, we were really to peek behind the curtain. We were just deciding what to do next. The in this current era we live in, there are both a million options and no good ones. Especially after a million episodes like we've done on the show, it's just like, okay, what do we want to do next? We want to dig into this sort of semi self-published book world where people are putting out their autobios, but they look really crappy and low key and probably not super well written. Do we want to watch another show that is similar to the 10 other shows we've done before? Do we want to dig for like a feature length doc somewhere? Like the pickings, they're not slim because there is just so much stuff being made. Like, if we just use Peacock alone, we could find something to talk about. But this A&E thing is, A&E isn't exactly a barn burning network. I don't think people are clamoring to watch A&E, but they seem to just be going really, really all in on WWE and these sort of documentary stories. So to me, that was the most intriguing part. Is I was curious, like, what is A&E going to be doing here that isn't something we've already seen? Like, because I figured it was. Like, I was like, the only way this is going to be good and have upside and be intriguing is if it really takes a route that we haven't seen. And I will say again, I've only seen one Rivals, but as of you, I believe. But they don't reinvent the wheel by any means, but they try and tell a fuller, deeper story in a way that most documentaries with the WWE stamp on it don't. I feel like they put aside, they did something we're clamoring for these things to do, which is put aside kayfabe, stop trying to sell your brand as the only brand, and acknowledge, the decades of history that you owned and that just have existed in wrestling. And I think Hogan and Andre is a perfect example to do that. I didn't expect them to dive really deep into it. I felt like we'd start at WrestleMania 3 and sort of go from there, but instead we actually get a pretty full example of this story.
It's funny how these episodes we do now, the first 10 minutes is us justifying why we chose what we chose. And just the content creation aspect is behind the scenes of like,
but
well, there's all this stuff. Why did we choose this one? I don't know, but here we are.
But at this
Um,
point, like we're learning so little new information, that I'm personally captivated by the machinations of how this came to be, what story it's trying to tell, the route it's going to. Like that interests me so much more than the actual literal content of the episode.
oh yeah, for sure. And you know, I think I was expecting this, like to your point, I was expecting this to have the same tropes as some of the other stuff, and this was like surprisingly more honest in earnest in its approach with regards to like acknowledging competitors and like, oh, did you know that Hogan and Andre fought each other a lot in the '70s and early '80s, and like, but their roles were reversed. It's like I did not expect them to kind of to present that because
That was like a
especially the
dirty
Hogan
little
Andre.
secret for a while there, like or just something that they had no interest and really honestly no reason to reveal. Like they wanted WrestleMania 3 to feel unique, so it just made no sense to acknowledge these guys had ever interacted before.
Right, but I got yeah, and I guess it's just been so long that I mean, because if you really break down like the Hogan Andre feud, they only had those two matches, and I guess they had that steel cage match, like when during the Hulkamania era
You mean three,
of.
four? No, they had four prominent matches, I would say.
Oh yeah, that's right. They
Because
didn't
they
even go into WrestleMania
three,
4.
four, the cage match, which I didn't even know happened, and then they had the one on main event where Andre won the belt.
Right, right. But they had to fill out the rest of the hour because
It wasn't the most in depth. It wasn't like a rivalry that spans years and years and years. Like it was basically a year and change.
right, it was like two, maybe three matches in the one that they have always presented as like the main Hogan Andre rivalry. Um, so I get why they did it. I just didn't expect it, and to go into such, go into Japan and go into like kind of really exploring their relationship more is was kind of a breath of fresh air in many ways.
Yeah, I would say so. I like you said, it's more. It's also sort of the low bar we set for them now that
Right.
like and all these documentary series. Yeah, when they do the bare minimum beyond the tales we've been told 100 times over, I go, whoa, wow, you're giving me like little crumbs, like what delicious crumbs you're serving us, which is not
Right.
damning with faint praise. But so let's back up a little bit though, because so this series again, one we hadn't seen before. At its core, it's a documentary series telling the story of a feud, a rivalry, like nothing that is new or special or unique. The underlying element, which we should talk about so we can get it out of the way because it's bad, is a sort of roundtable. A moving instead of a voiceover. Really, it does a series. It's a roundtable sort of behind the scenes, which another trope they've used a bunch before. They sort of mush the two together here, which is curious. Now, the roundtable is, at least in this episode, and I assume it's the same for all of them. It's Freddie Prinze Jr., Hollywood's Freddie Prinze Jr., who, as people may know, had a stint as a WWE writer at some point because he's a big wrestling fan, and it seemed like in that era when they were trying to semi go Hollywood, or they were giving everybody a chance, kind of, and then you'd come in, you'd probably burn out in 6 months, and they replace you with somebody else, and then that would repeat ad nauseum. So it's Freddie Prinze Jr. is back in the fold, hosting the show, sort of with no fanfare. I didn't know he was there until he showed up, which is not a great sign because he's somewhat known, It probably should make that more clear. And then it was Booker T, Devon Dudley, Natalia, and JBL, which is the weirdest crew. Really, a lot of overlap there. Booker T, Devon, and JBL had essentially were around the same amount of time. So it's not like old and young. It's three guys of a very similar age from a very similar time, and then Natalia sort of sadly is the token woman involved, and then they just sort of have the most generic surface level conversation about the feud that really just gets you moving from clip to clip.
Why weren't they just talking heads?
I don't
Like
know. Why wasn't it just voiceover like it always is? Like what was the idea? I guess the Freddie Prinze thing strikes me as we're going to be on we're not on the network. I mean it's Peacock now, but I guess we're going to be on a legitimate cable network, so let's try and make this feel a little more legitimate with a real quote unquote celebrity, I guess. Like that's all I can figure why they felt they needed to sort of mush those things together and bring someone in from outside. It's a curious choice, I would say, and it's
did
not
they
successful in any real way.
did they identify him as a former writer?
I believe
I don't
so. I believe the
remember.
Chiron at the
Did
bottom
they?
said
Okay.
former WWE writer,
Okay.
which I thought was like kind of
That,
sort of tongue in cheek funny too. Like that's surely what you know him from as a WWE writer, not from Scooby Doo the movie.
ironically, there's a whole A&E or Peacock or wherever documentary idea of documenting Freddie Prinze Jr. as a WWE writer in and of itself because that's such a
Yes.
weird thing. But I digress. Ultimately, it's like I mean, like, look, actually, you know what? I changed my tune. I award them for trying something different. I mean, they do the table for three, so they have that whole weird table dynamic
Hmm.
conversation set up. So sure, they tried it, and whether it worked or not, I'm not even going to offer an opinion.
But you give them
They
credit for not just going with voiceover then? Or the same talking heads we've seen, like literally, because we're at a point right now, you and I at least, where we some of these talking heads, I'm like, I've seen this in 3 other documentaries, like literally this same shot, Hogan wearing the same shirt, the same bandana, saying
no
the same anecdote, like we've seen it so many times.
different shirts. He actually they sourced from two different interviews, I believe.
Well, I think there was new Hogan in this too, right?
Yeah, but like
Newish at
they
least,
also
maybe
pulled
not like,
old.
but there certainly was old Hogan as well, without a doubt. There's
Yeah,
still stuff we've seen before. It wasn't all fresh.
yeah,
I mean, because we see
and
Piper and Mean Gene, we see a lot of dead guys too. So
well, sure, yeah. I mean, yeah, they've been pulling from the last 20 years of telling this story.
yeah,
Um, so I mean, yeah, it broke up the talking heads, I guess. It was inoffensive. It wasn't great, but like kind of weird at times. But also, sure, like it just connects you from A to B.
it
And
does, and it isn't. Yeah, it's just what struck me was not that it was poorly done or distracting, just that everyone on the round table maybe got one line of dialogue. Like Devon would be like, "Oh man, I loved Andre," and then it would just go to the Andre clip, and you're like, "Is that the connective tissue? Like, is that helpful? Like, I
yeah,
mean, it's better than nothing, I suppose, but it's just an interesting choice."
right. And it's like you had this like personal story with Stephanie McMahon and Andre, and we've heard it a million times. It's like, could Stephanie have been sitting where Natalia was? Why was Natalia there?
Yeah.
Like, why were none of them had any connection to any of these wrestlers? So it's like,
No, none of them wrestled. I mean, Booker T has the most connection to Hogan, and that's very tenuous. Like they were in the same company a couple times for a couple of years. Like
yeah, he
that's
had an infamous promo on Hogan once.
that's
It did not
right.
go over well
That's
for
right.
obvious reasons.
That is
Uh,
that is a relatively strong. I mean, compared to the rest of them, that's an ironclad connection. But
right.
Devon and Hulk Hogan, I imagine I'm sure they've interacted before, but I can't imagine they've had detailed conversations.
I cannot confirm nor deny when those two were in the same company or room before, so
They don't strike me as pals for a couple reasons, but
probably not.
so anyway,
And
that's sort of the underlying element, and the rest of it is clips and then some talking heads. The usual routine interwoven, but like you said, and what makes me intrigued to watch more Rivals, which we already touched on, is that they tell the story beyond the story. Like there is a version of this documentary that is starts at Hulk Hogan flexing, tearing the shirt, being cool, maybe a little bit of Andre with his big poofy hair, being a good guy, waving, and then you get right to Andre tears heel, tears Hogan's cross off, makes him bleed, and we're off to the races. Pretty much starting with 3, and then just doing a little more stuff on 3, a little, and then a little more on every single step from 3 to 4, which is basically the documentary doesn't even really mention 4. It pretty much goes 3 to the Hogan, the Andre double referee screw job, and there's a version of it again though where it's 3 to 4 that's so much worse. That we're sitting here right now being like, this sucks, this is stupid, what a waste of time, because that's 100% regurgitated things we've heard before. There's no nuance there. There's nothing special. There's nothing unique about that at all. But this one, at least, we get Hogan as a heel. We get Andre as a face. We get acknowledgement that this match is a big match, a match they've had before, just with less fanfare. And now, like, Andre is the ultimate bad guy for this version of Hulk Hogan, which. Watching this documentary again, I agreed with. I was like, there is it. The thing it reminded me more than anything was they did so many versions of this after this, and they did Bundy at WrestleMania 2, so they did it before this too. But like, so much of what happened after WrestleMania 3 was Vince trying to do this again with shittier bad guys, and it really reminded me how good Andre was in that particular role.
yeah, I mean, this honestly, I think they did a good job of making me realize how important this was and how much they cared, and like also just like the next level, next gen stats of like, oh, this very important like title match that took place on TV was the most viewed thing, the most viewed televised anything wrestling ever. Like nothing will ever beat this on TV ever. Like the rating was outrageous.
And they did the most
Rivals
complicated screw job ending possible too.
yeah,
Probably
reminding everybody
infuriating
why.
everybody.
Reminding everybody why they should not be watching wrestling in 33 million at a time. But I will say, just like the format of rivals and the rivalry element, like I know this sounds so stupid, but like if you get to like a documentary, a retrospective of someone's career, it gets kind of very rambly. Yeah, you're kind of touching on some stuff, but you're really touching on just swatches of and just like top line and just very you're going in and out of different time periods and different moments like a little too broadly and vaguely, and like you forget that wrestling stories and rivalries within the confines of wrestling are very linear. And when you're watching like the build to WrestleMania 3 and then from 3 to 4, it's like you're seeing week to week evolution of the story, and like which is why when we watch like the outside interference videos, it's like you don't need to do much to suck me into a story when you're kind of giving me each story beat week over week or month over month, or like in the case of Hogan and Andre, it was like over a course of a couple of years, but like you forget just how easy it is to tell those stories and get sucked in when because of the way wrestling stories are constructed over time.
Yeah, and especially when you're cherry picking the good ones too. Like that's the joy of, like you said, the outside interference videos, or a documentary like this, or a series like this, is you can pick. If you did Hogan versus Savage, you'd get a great story too, because they're the best examples of a Vince WWE storyline that was planned out 6 months to a year in advance, and they hit each beat correctly along the way, and especially these days it's a little bumpy just because there's more TV and there's more time and there's more to do. But the one like if they when they do a Bloodline one someday, it's going to be great because it's the most recent best example of a year-long story done right with actual hitting each little bump along the way properly, spacing it out, building tension, building interest, so that sort of thing. Like they don't always do that. If they just tried to do let's say every big WrestleMania match, they tried to do one of these documentaries, some of them would be shitty because those matches aren't very good, the builds aren't very good. It doesn't always go as planned. But something like this is, it sells itself because it was truly a big match that is as large as they purport it to be. But they did do a great job of getting you there, even though the highlights are relatively few. Like, you don't see a ton of stuff. It's really that Piper's Pit segment more than anything. But they hit the notes there so well that, like, you don't even need more than that. Like, you're in great shape. And they don't, it's just, I just think, but I think that where there's depth on something like this is you see, they tell you sort of, they give you enough backstage to keep you interested, where it's like Hogan was bad, he turns good, he becomes the biggest star in the world. Andre used to basically be the biggest star in the world. Even if there wasn't, Hogan loves to puff up the professional tension. Surely there was some, because Andre wants his money and wants to be number one. Like, at the very least, there's a natural human instinct to stay on top and want to be the guy. So they play into that a little bit too, as sort of the underlying sentiment there is, even if everyone's doing business and everyone's smiling and being nice, there certainly is a passing of the torch there from, a big star, but definitely more of an attraction, to a literal, action figure brought to life, who everyone sort of gets behind. So they lean into that just enough, I think, to keep it interesting while hitting the high notes of the actual wrestling programming, and it becomes a pretty good meld, I think, of the two.
Yeah, and that's where, like, to me, just being open and honest with your content and letting your interviewees kind of just speak not in first off, not in kayfabe, because like it's like this would sound ridiculous if you're keeping kayfabe through all this. Just
Especially
allows you to go.
once you get into Andre buying the belt, or Ted buying the belt from him, and it's like, okay, this makes no sense. Where's Jack Tunney?
Yeah, right. Artfully, they dodge the whole like Hogan bringing both Hebners out and just looking at them and trying to explain like what like wasn't there a kayfabe reason like he did plastic surgery to look like his brother or
Yes,
something?
I believe that was the idea, that there were two Hebners, but they lie and say they made a second Hebner, right?
Yeah, yeah.
It's just so
I don't
stupid.
remember them going into detail on the document on that.
I'm
So
pretty sure
for
I'm
good
pretty sure they
reason.
skipped that entirely. I think they just said it was like a crooked ref and moved on.
Pretty much, yeah. Um, but just like going next level with this with all this, like, you know, where it made sense and where, like, in between the story beats of the actual wrestling show, it's like it just made for a really full picture and a really full presentation of this information. And like I had never seen a lot of that. I'd never like look. I was born in '85, so I never saw anything pre Hulkamania, but like live, I should say. And there's a lot they showed, like even just like the dumb interview segments between WrestleMania 3 and 4. Like I'd never seen any of that where they kept crying, "Oh, crooked ref," and actually Andre pinned him, and then the ref said, "Just kidding," it was a 2 count, and like them using that as the reason and for the rematch, eventual rematch, like, and them spending a year building to that rematch, like I never seen any of that except for the rematch and with the crooked refs. So like, all that was like really, I just thought well done for what they're trying to do, which was tell this rivalry, which is exactly what you want from this show.
Yep. And I will say, and I suspect you agree. I give them bonus points for this particular episode too, because they have to deal with the specter of Hulk Hogan's endless bullshit. Like you have when you bring Terry, when you bring my boy Terry onto your documentary, or when you're telling any sort of Terry-centric story, you have to contend with his version of things, and Andre is no longer alive, has not been alive for a long time, so Hulk's the main character in this story, and rightfully so. He's Hulk Hogan. Like I get that you need him there, why not? But Hulk just loves fucking lying about this stuff, and I think this documentary does a pretty good job of not. Maybe I don't know whether how much of it was a conscious choice, or maybe just because the way they put it together, they didn't need to lean on him for too much, other than an anecdote here and there. But there's not a ton of things that I hear and I go, okay, we've heard enough to know that's bullshit. Like the only thing that I really noted that I was like, this is such crap, is Hulk loves to tell everybody that he was not sure he was going to get Andre to his feet, that he was going to slam Andre, and that Andre was going to stay down for 3 until it happens. And I'm like, come the fuck on. Like, Jesus Christ. Like, I fully believe that Andre was difficult. I fully believe that, he was so large that, if he wanted to sandbag you, he could do that, obviously. Like, that's always, I'm sure he did it to many people over the course of his career, in certain circumstances. But at WrestleMania 3, on that stage, making all that money, with Vince and Hogan both there, talking to him the whole time, like, I personally refuse to believe that there was any chance that this was not planned out to a T in advance. I just don't buy it. It makes no sense to me.
Do you think Vince McMahon would have put him out there if the narrative was Andre does not want to do business?
Especially young, like, could lose the company with a fuck up Vince McMahon, I just think he might have been a little more freewheel, and then maybe a little less set in his ways, a little less, gruff, because he's probably the same age as a lot of these guys, but I do not believe for a second that if Vince truly thought Andre was going to fuck them over, that he would run Andre out there. He would figure something out. He'd pay him more. He would do some Vince thing to end this match. And the fact that Terry keeps making it sound like they were a hair away from everything going wrong, I was like, why are you doing this at this point? Like, it's 2023. Yeah. Are you really still telling us this story that Andre was like a loose cannon who was about to, there's also no, people tell that story. I've never seen any documented footage of Andre screwing anybody over, it seems like it's always about the fear of him doing it, but I don't recall anyone actually saying, like, in Shea Stadium in 1978, Andre wouldn't get slammed and ruin the match, and everyone, like, had a bad night. Like, have you ever heard an example of that actually happening?
No, but all it would take is one soundbite from Vince McMahon saying, "Yeah, I would have never let that happen." So,
because it makes him look foolish too, right? Like, it makes him look like why would he allow that to take place?
If that's what Terry believes, then that's all on Terry's head. Like, that's all you would need to extinguish that narrative forever, because that's what I truly believe, my heart of hearts. So,
yeah,
it wouldn't take me a whole lot of trust and leap to a logical leap for me to believe that, your boy is just full of shit.
And you're right. Vince has never, as far as I know, at least not in the things we've seen, come out and address that in any sort of way. But Vince also loves, one of his, overarching traits is bullshitting about WrestleMania 3. Like, WrestleMania 3 is like his baby. You know, like it was
Yeah.
the biggest, most important one. Loves to lie about the attendance. Loves it. Like this has reached such mythical status in his head, and then by proxy everybody else's head because they just keep repeating the same BS. So maybe he just like I don't want to. If the mystique is so large at this point, I'd rather not even poke a hole in it. Like just believe whatever you want to believe. It's WrestleMania 3. You know, it's beyond belief.
Bro, oh, God, talk about an attendance record that somehow keeps growing
They
every
kept
year.
fucking saying in this episode too. Like Rosenberg says it. I was like, come on. Like we all know that's not. It still was so many people. You don't need to do 93,000 anymore. We know it wasn't 93.
Well, yeah, I don't even know what it's even at this point.
Yeah,
Like,
in
I
real
don't know
life.
what I just assume 90 because it's more
I think
round than
Meltzer said 78, which that's in my head at least.
still insane,
Oh,
but
it's gigantic. It's you know it's unprecedented.
yeah. Um,
But
it's
whatever.
also super sad watching, thinking about other just visuals and things I've never seen. While watching Andre kind of slump onto the barber shop set,
Hmm.
and I'm just like, oh yeah, that really looks bad.
Especially because, like we said, you see clips of younger Andre in this, and I always forget until I see it again. He was so nimble back in the day, especially for his size. Like he moved great. Like in the late 70s, you know, 7 8 years before this, like he moves like a athletic man, you know. And I was like, wow, this guy
Yeah,
like could really do this. Like we're so used to, like you said, the 84, 85 and after Andre, which is you know really just a stand in there type guy, like big chops, you know but runs into the corner on you maybe, but like nothing beyond that. Like there was an Andre back in the day who could really move.
yeah. I mean, Big Show jumped off the top rope once, and I went, holy shit, Andre used to do it a lot more than that.
So I mean, it's good. It's you know, especially because I will say also, well, Keith Elliott Greenberg also featured in
Yeah.
this series, which is great. I hope he's done a bunch of them.
Wrestling historian. I feel like he did one giant day because I feel like I've seen him in that blazer before for
Yeah,
other stuff. So I'm
I
like,
feel like the peak.
he probably,
I feel like it was the same outfit as the Flair thing, wasn't it?
I believe so. Yeah.
I mean, that might be Keith's outfit. I'm not sure. I mean, not throwing shade at his attire, but he might have like that might be his on TV suit. Like if I was on TV, I'd probably have one suit that I'd lean on too. So
Either that or he spent 20 hours talking about every wrestling star of the last 50
which is,
years.
I mean, he'll tell us next time we talk to him. That does sound feasible.
But I mean, that's, I can't think of another wrestler story that deserves to be in that spot more than him. So
Yeah, especially like because I'm so used to seeing him tell Flair stories. I'm like, oh, good, Hogan Andre. Like, because he was. There's probably not a ton of guys who were around who have sort of that rep from the old days too. You know, like he's
mhm.
been doing it for so long and watching wrestling and talking about wrestling and documenting it that it makes sense to give him sort of the 80s and be like, okay, you're our 80s guy. If that's a role he fills, I'd be very happy for him.
Also the Blassie connection too, where
Yes.
I mean, he was very loose because he was only managing Hogan for a short period of time, or relative to all this. But yeah, I could also see them bringing him in for that, and then just being like, "Well, clearly you know about wrestling history, so let's just keep going."
Yeah. So well, now that we've seen this one, and now that we know that Rivals is a thing of some note, will you be watching more WWE Rivals in the future?
I will for this show. Sounds like a great idea to. But it'll cut off the first 10 minutes of us justifying us checking out another thing. But yeah, I thought it was pretty good. I mean, I'd have to look at the content slate they
I
have
was gonna say
for next year.
we're into some rough. I mean, from my perspective, there was a new as of this recording. There's a new one that aired last night. It was Taker Mankind.
Well, that's a good one.
I mean, what
It's
are
a
we gonna?
rivalry.
Yeah, I know, but what are we gonna? Is there anything? I mean, I suppose they could surprise us again, but like, I just don't know if there's any information there that we don't already have. We've done so much Foley and Taker on this show. Like, what information are we gonna? I bet they'll show us. Like, did they have a WCW match at one point, like with me and Mark versus Cactus? Like,
Maybe,
I
but
bet they dip back into like some of that stuff. But otherwise,
here's
it's the Boiler Room and it's the Hell in a Cell, right?
well, they've had so many matches. That's the thing, though, is they've had so many matches. I guess we'll bring this up if we ever do cover this episode, particularly. But I think that'd be a good one to actually be like a test for with regards to like, are they going to go with the greatest hits and call it a day, or are we going to go into like, you know, they had they had so many fucking pay-per-view matches
Yeah.
together. It's crazy. Like,
Yeah.
and I say I don't mean to just paint in broad strokes, but like, there's so many that you forget about that actually all build to these bigger moments. That like, that's what to me, that's what the show could be and should be, is talking about the steps that get you to the big highlights.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, we'll see. I'll give it a shot. It's the one that's out right now. And then the next one that comes out this coming weekend is Rock versus Cena, which I don't.
Yeah.
Ugh. I mean, you sound more interested. I'm soured on both these. I don't like these ideas.
To me, deeper dives into like actual rivalries is you're going to uncover probably more interesting things, in my opinion, than if you were to do a rock doc,
Well,
generally speaking.
I definitely like it more than the season finale of last season was Stephanie McMahon versus Brie Bella. And I gotta
Oof,
say,
okay.
I don't think. I imagine they were like, we gotta do. There's no other women's feuds on here. But I mean, is that really the only women's feud? Just do Trish versus Lita, right?
I feel like they did that
Yeah, they
on
might
the
have. They might
network
be like, shit,
version.
we were, yeah. But they did. The first episode is Brett versus Shawn. So I mean, like, it's not like Undertaker versus Kane. Like, they're obviously not afraid to go in back to the well.
No, but
Stephanie Brie, though, what even is that? Like, was that a feud?
I don't know. I literally have no memory of this.
I mean,
Period.
yeah, I don't really. So I will say I'm going to watch. There's also like Ray versus Eddie, which sounds interesting. There's some WCW stuff they can show there. There's WCW versus WWE, which I mean, I'd be curious to
Oh
watch
God.
that. I'd be curious to watch that to see if they were remotely even-handed. You know, if they actually give WCW the credit it deserves, or whether they just say it was, you know, or whether they just it's all about WWF with like a little hint of like, and then WCW did this, but then we did this and this and this, then they did that. Like, I imagine it's going to be
But isn't
skewed
that
for
just the
sure.
Monday Night Wars? Like that's just the Monday Night Wars. Unless they
Yeah,
mean like the invasion, which is even worse.
yeah. Then they have to admit that if they admit the invasion is bad, then that would truly be unprecedented.
Yeah. Well, so okay, so we'll cherry pick the ones that we think are
Yeah,
interesting.
I
Just like
think
any
we
other
I think we
series.
weirdly picked a good episode. I think there's just, you
Mhm.
know, I thought it was gonna be it was really the first one, the newest one. That's really why we went with it. But I think there's just it's old enough, and you know, not again. That's not we've talked about Hulk, we've talked about Andre. It's nothing you know, we haven't covered. But I just think there's more nuggets there that I'd like to revisit. It's a story that I know a ton about, but I don't hear about it every second. Like, it's not Brett versus Shawn. It's not, you know, Austin Rock. Like, there's something there at least that I'm intrigued, which is why I like the Ray versus Eddie one. I'm like, okay, that was technically 25 years ago. Like, I'm intrigued to, or you know, I'd like to hear more about that. Like, there's stuff. Some of these have stuff there that I'm like, okay, I think there might be meat on that bone.
Yeah. And you know, two things. One is it was a season premiere, so they probably like batch shot a lot of this and realized like, okay, the Hogan Andre one on paper is good, and we're seeing dailies or whatever. It's like this is probably the best one just from a archival and storytelling perspective. And so I'm not surprised that this might be the best one, is because it's the first one, and that's what you usually do with your program TV series
Yep.
week to week. But also like it was one of the ones that we like, you know, even the most interesting Attitude Era one, it's like, yeah, I lived through it, so a lot of it's not going to be new information. Like, and I didn't, you know, I did not live through. Like, I was 3 or 2 years old when WrestleMania one or WrestleMania three came out. Like, it was either I watched it on tapes, sure, but like, it's not new and like it is new information. A lot of this is new because a lot of it, like, I didn't watch a lot because I was like a toddler.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think that all that adds up to making it a compelling and good episode of this. So,
Yeah, and you know, it's nice to have another option in the content mail that we can revisit now that we have a good taste in our mouths. Like, that's not how these normally go. So if we went back into the rivals grab bag and picked another episode, I think we have some.
Stephanie and Brie,
God, I mean, we might have to do it just to see what that is. I mean, I'd
I
like to.
kind of want to now.
I can't imagine. But again, if they tell it's probably going to be about how Stephanie launched the women's revolution, if I had to guess.
But then
which
how's
is
that a rivalry in three then?
I don't know. I mean, I guess that maybe that's what she was doing at the time. I don't know. We'll have to let's watch a good one and then we'll watch a bad one at some point. We have it's it'll be something for us to yell about for 25 minutes at least. So there's always that.
Great. Well, that'll be our justification.
But yeah, if you're intrigued by all this, Rivals is on A&E. There's a new one every Sunday, I believe, and it's it's something. They got some ideas there. They set off good for the season, like you said, Walt. It may be cherry picking the best one, but there seems like they have the handle on how to tell these stories in a fashion that stands out from the typical network fare. So fingers crossed, but if you're intrigued, Rivals is on television, and we'll probably be revisiting it sometime soon. So we will see about that. And if you want to hear more about documentary series, like we said, the A&E Booker T episode that aired last year, you can find all of that in our archives at awesometruth.libsyn.com. You can subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, everywhere podcasts are delivered, we are there. And you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at awesometruthpod. Well, great to talk Rivals with you. We got way more out of that than I think anybody imagined, so that's always a win. And we enjoyed it. Like I get tickled pink when we watch something that I don't hate, and I'm like, I want to finish this. I want to watch it all and actually see where they're going with it. Like that's truly a treat.
Yeah, it was a treat, and we got to talk about your boy Terry. So win-win.
We did talk about my boy Terry. We got plenty of Terry. He is my boy. I have a note I have like an Awesome Truth little doc where I put the things I say at the beginning and ends, and I have a note that says inside jokes, my boy Terry. So I know whenever we do Terry, we're gonna have some spirited banter there. So this was a healthy dose of Terry for better or for worse. So hooray.
It was this time for better, but
Yes,
mainly it's usually for worse.
Next time, and usually very much for worse. Oh, well, thank you all so much for listening. And remember, the truth will set you free.